Meet Dylan. The glow from the TV flickers on Dylan's face as he reaches for another handful of sun chips. The voices from the Netflix show blend into the background, drowned out by the thoughts spinning in his head. What if I mess up again? What if this job is just like the last one? It's past midnight, and Dylan knows he needs to go to bed. He has a few days left at his old job before he starts his next position, but he keeps hitting next episode as a means to guard himself from his own mind. His phone buzzes, a text from his girlfriend. Hey, just a few days left before you start the new job. How do you feel? He wants to say that he's excited, that it's a fresh start and that he's ready, but the truth is, he's not so sure. He left his last job due to a toxic manager. But what if the problem was not just with the company? What if he's the problem? What if he repeats the same patterns of overthinking, stressing out over everything, and shutting down under pressure? His new manager seemed really impressive in the interview. But what if he can't handle the demand of being in this new startup environment? He sighs and throws his phone across the sofa and doesn't reply. The next morning, he drags himself out of bed, feeling exhausted before the day even begins. He looks at the mirror and can't even recognize himself. The dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, and the spiraling thoughts that just don't seem to stop. And he thinks, I can't keep going like this. Dylan wants to be decisive. He wants to be able to handle change without feeling so exhausted by it. He doesn't want the stress of his work to affect every other area of his life and those worries to be impacting his relationship and to be in this cycle of doubt and exhaustion. Today, I'm speaking with Nick Tasler, organizational psychologist and best-selling author who helps leaders like Dylan embrace change, make better decisions, and break the cycle of overthinking. Nick has worked with some of the biggest companies in the world, and his research on decision-making has been featured in places like the Harvard Business Review, New York Times, and The Atlantic. And I'm eager to hear how Nick would coach Dylan on how to step into this new role with confidence, how to manage the uncertainty, and how to break the cycle of stress that has kept him stuck for so long. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Nick, we're going to get to Dylan's story here in a bit, but I want to learn more about you and your story. I looked on your website and there was something in there that intrigued me. And I tend to find that these episodes I can kind of be selfish and ask questions that I'm interested in. And then hopefully my audience will resonate with the question, right? But one thing about you that was so interesting is that you have, you describe it as you're nomadic by nature. So your wife, your kids, like you guys, you live in different places. So tell me about that. And what's the perspective that that's offered you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the perspective is definitely where do I start here? So let me just start here, like a little bit to explain this. So in my 47 trips around the sun, only 47 this summer. I've moved 34 times. And so nomadic by nature is really an apt description of my childhood, my adulthood, and probably now my kids' childhood as well. My wife, on the other hand, completely the opposite. Her parents still live in the house that they moved into after they got married, and that will be the house that they most likely, they're already retired in and will most likely probably die in. And so totally different perspectives there. But so for me, it's kind of like it was a personal thing that was sort of, obviously as a kid, I didn't have a choice. It was my parents' decision, right? But now, as I've got into my profession, and particularly organizational psychology, it's probably not an accident that the specific area of organizational psychology I chose to study was change,
Yeah.
because that's probably been, to use the cliche, the only constant in my life. And so I think I've tried to kind of like lean into it and leverage that as, okay, so on the one hand, this is kind of crazy and maybe it could be disruptive and disturbing for a lot of people. But for me, it was, I've chosen to say, okay, well, what can I learn from this? If I really just like embrace this, how much of a different perspective can that give me than the average person? And then how can I take that back to the average person and say, through all this crazy chaos of changing all the time, what have I learned that's useful for you?
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of the long and the short of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that what you have is the experience of change.
Yeah.
And just there's nothing better than experience, right? Like, I mean, we could
Yeah.
learn, we can read books, but you have the
Mm-hmm.
experience of I've gone through so much change, and then you can impart lessons onto others. And involve your kids with this too. I read
Mm-hmm.
that you also at times bring your kids to your speaking engagements,
Yeah.
so that, like, what does that offer you to have your kids there, or what do they get out of it too, to be able to travel along with you?
Yeah, well, I think again, you touched on the word. It's like the experience, and
Yeah.
so it's the experience that they get. So I work for myself, so kind of every day is bring your kid to work day. So, but this is like actually bring your kid to work day, so they can see, that. I mean, for a long time, my company is called Decision Pulse, and I would talk about, Decision Pulse and decisionpulse.com. They used to think that like decisionpulse.com was like a place, like a real, not just a web property, right?
Yeah.
And so I want them to know that, like, when I'm gone and I'm doing these things, I just feel like it's better for them when they can like lay eyes on it and they can experience it and they can see. So when I'm gone, I'm not on another planet. It's like they can imagine, oh, I know what you're doing now. And so I think even when I'm not there, it kind of creates a little bit of a connection for them because they can visualize where dad is and what he's doing. And then of course I think the other part is, I think the this is sound maybe a little bit arrogant or narcissistic, but like I think the lessons that I'm sharing with audiences are applicable to them, and I want them to see dad's not just full of crap. Like, oh, okay, the stuff he's telling me, other people want to hear that too. Maybe I should listen occasionally, right?
Well, I find that to be really inspiring. I really do, because my daughter asks
Yeah,
me those questions all the time, Nick. I mean,
yeah,
she, Daddy, what do you actually do? She's like, I know you help people, but how do you
uh-huh,
help them?
right.
And I think I'm taking just from this conversation a valuable lesson for me, which is, why don't I bring her on one of these speaking engagements? Why
Yeah,
don't I let her see what Daddy really does? And also, the thing about our kids, and I'm sure you get this experience, which is you tell them one thing, sure, but when you tell that a whole audience and everyone
right.
is engaged and clapping,
Uh-huh.
now she's like, all right, I'm bought in. That this is
Right, right.
actually a valuable lesson that I want to learn.
Either all these people are just as crazy and full of BS as my dad, or maybe he's onto something.
Right. Exactly. And in so you are a best-selling author. So you wrote your Year of Wonders. That came out this year, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I always get curious whenever someone decided to, because that's work to put together
Hmm.
something like
Hmm.
that, to publish a book.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for you? Like, what was the reason why you wanted to put this into your message into a book and share it with the world?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So this is actually my fifth book, and but after the fourth one, okay. So my first book was published in 2008. Okay. So signed the deal in 2007. It actually hit the market in 2008. And like ever since that first book, like I had all these ideas bubbling in my brain that like I wanted to get down on paper. And so I write that book. And naturally, as a part of the writing process, and particularly a book, like the editor looks at it and is like, oh, that's a good idea. It doesn't fit here. Oh, that's not so bad. It doesn't fit here. So when I got done writing that book, I had like all this other stuff just kind of on the editing room floor, so to speak, that I couldn't wait to write the next one. And that continued for 4 books, right? But then my last book in 2017, prior to this one, I kind of got done and I was like, that's really all I'm burning to say. I've kind of said everything that I'm dying to say. And so I took rather than every 2 or 3 years, now it was like a 7-year hiatus. And then finally it was kind of like really my experience from the pandemic, my experience, my client's experience, when I kind of stumbled onto some new ideas, some more fertile ground that maybe had been right in front of me all along that I hadn't quite noticed before. But something about that, this was one of the powers of having change and disruption come into our life. If we open our eyes, we'll see things in a way that we hadn't seen before. And we don't even have to travel. We don't even have to move. Like the stuff that's been right in front of our nose for 10 years, 20 years, all of a sudden it gets like the change twists it into a new light and we see it in a way we've never seen it before. And so for me, this book was like life imitating art, because I had these experiences, some from my childhood, that I'd never thought about in this way before. And then at the same time, I'm seeing it's like directly applicable to what my clients are facing. And so all that kind of came together. And so naturally, just my process is then I start looking at the academic research and seeing what of this is, which of my intuitions are actually empirically validated and which of them aren't. And like, what does the research tell us about what I'm observing? And so put all that together and now we have a new book.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way you describe that way of looking at life from different angles and how something that we experienced years ago could teach us a lesson years later because we now it's like we took lenses off. Like we were wearing a certain colored lenses and then we took them off and we're like, oh, that's been right there the whole time, but I'm seeing it in a completely different color now, right? I'm seeing it, in a different shade. That's so. And then you mentioned that you have so many different client experiences, and I saw that you've worked with such a diverse industries, diverse organizations. You've worked with companies like United Health Group, General Electric, Microsoft, JPMorgan. I think I saw RBC, Royal Bank of Canada. I actually did something with them recently too. And so what I find is that you've had this opportunity to work with all these different teams, and I'm sure there are some commonalities, like some common challenges that you see in working with all these diverse groups. So what are some of the common struggles, challenges that you see from them?
So most recently, I would say the thing that's coming up over and over and over again is teams and the individuals on the team, and maybe even the organization as a whole, are finding themselves at the top of a growth curve. Okay, so for a lot of organizations, the pandemic and just the economic environment, it actually created a lot of opportunities for them. Okay, so they came out, and it, depend on the industry, of course. But so like, let's say the last few years, and then some of them, maybe the pandemic slowed it down, but then like the aftermath of it kind of skyrocketed them up a little bit of a growth curve. They kind of bounced back better than before. And now fast forward to 2025, and that little surge is now like leveling off. But the company's growth goals don't level off, right? They continue pointing up and to the right, particularly if you're a publicly traded company. And so you're expected constant growth. And so you have this awesome year or really good year or 2 years, 3 years. And then all of a sudden it's like, now it's slowing down a little bit, but you still have these expectations. All of a sudden they've gone from like the plucky underdog that is barely surviving, this crazy pandemic and whatever. And now they've shot up and it's this great story, but now it's like the sequel to the underdog story. Like they got carried off the court on the shoulders of their teammates. But now it's year 2. And guess what? Now you're expected to win. So you're not the scrappy underdog anymore. Right. And so I find this, like I said, at the individual level, as much as at the team or the organizational level. And I think this is the case a lot of times for, people all throughout their career, but let's say mid-career, where it's like, wow, I'm doing great. I'm doing better than maybe I thought I could 10 years ago, but you don't get that bliss anymore from the achievement because it's expected.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what is that doing? What's going on inside your brain, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, well, it's our brains tend to normalize things, right? We get to a certain level and now that becomes the norm, and it requires a new lever that needs to be pulled to get you to that next place. So what is that lever, Nick? Like, in other words, these organizations or these individuals that are at the top of that growth curve and now they want to continue to grow, what are the keys to being able to make that happen?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost is to clarify the reality, to get a handle on what's going on and what is the difference between my reality as I think I understand it and my reality as it actually is. Okay. So one of the main things to note here is, and this is very well researched, there's something called loss gain asymmetry. Okay. And so you imagine this S curve. Okay. I'm trying to make an S with my arm here, but imagine you're at the bottom of the S curve, and it's like down here, like, let's say you start your career, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Okay. You got nothing to lose. You're hungry. You're not afraid to fall down because you're already at the bottom. And so you're willing to take risks. You're willing to try new things. You're willing to experiment. And so now every change is an opportunity to better your position. Okay. But then you fall down because you're trying new things. And then all those skin knees start teaching you lessons. And so little by little, you grow your income, you grow your status socially, you grow the number of people for whom you have the privilege of leading and influencing and taking care of in your life as well as in your work. Now you've got a team. Now you've got children. Now you've got people that rely on you because you're so good, right? And then it's all of a sudden, now you're at the top of the S. Okay. And now everything looks differently. Now, whereas at the bottom, change used to look like an opportunity. Now it looks like a threat. And the reason why is we start seeing, and it's crazy how consistent this result is in a 1,000 different studies. When you're at the top of that growth curve, your brain is going to tell you to pay 3 times more attention to everything that could go wrong rather than what could go right. 3 times more attention to what you might lose rather than what you might gain. Okay. And so you have to understand that your perception of reality in this moment is actually pessimistic times 3. So what you see as this threat is not as big of a threat as you think it is. It's actually just as much of an opportunity. So you don't have to be scared of it, right? You don't have to go into your normal fear defense mechanisms. And, as we were talking about Dylan, that's a lot of what I think is going on with Dylan. So I don't know if we want to dive into Dylan's story now, but
in a bit. But I love the way you described that. I've never heard it explained that way, and I think it's spot on. And I could see the S visual and how that can continue, right? Because it could keep going, right? It can keep going. Now, how I often refer to that is at the beginning stage of our career, there is an attachment that we have to something that we want that we don't have yet, right? So that pushes us up. I want this, and when I get this, this is what I'm going to need to be happy, feel safe and secure. So it motivates you to the action, and then you then get it. Then what happens is the attachment just changes. Now there's something that I have that I'm afraid to lose.
Right.
And when there's something you have that you're afraid to lose, you want to hold on, you want to cling, you don't want to even pursue other things because you're afraid that it's going to create some disruption. But I love the way you described it, which is no, we need to shift our perspective, recognize that that's happening, and then aim towards whatever the opportunity is presenting itself like in front of us. I think that's amazing visual. It's something I think that everyone experiences at some point in their careers. Yeah, and with Dylan, but go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, and I think the other key thing, if we talk about, because really what we're looking for here is like a shift in mindset, right? Like a perspective shift. And so one of the keys to mindset change, mindset shifting, is to like understand that you've not just experienced this in your career, you've experienced this your whole life, from learning to ride a bike, to starting school, to starting junior high school, to starting high school, to joining that team, to whatever. Like, it is this S over and over and over again, this growth curve. And so again, it's to use a geeky psychology term, we can do this thing called temporal distancing. Okay. Temporal, just a fancy word for time, right? And so you can look at your situation from the perspective of, let's say, you 20 years ago. How would you look at this situation? And what you'd realize is like, well, 20 years ago, I would have been like shocked that I could be here right now. Right. And then now let's look 5, 10, 20 years into the future and imagine where you could be at that point. And how are you going to look back and at the things you're worrying about right now? The things that you're all stressed out about are like, oh, I'm probably not even going to remember them at that time. And I'm going to kick my own butt if I turn down this opportunity, right? If I don't like lean into it and embrace it. And so just this idea of like zooming out from a time perspective can help us see this. You see what the possibilities are. You see how far you've already come, and why can't that continue into the future? And then, and you understand, and I'd say this is like the whole point of the new book, Your Year of Wonders, is that like our whole lives have followed this pattern. Change around us unlocks growth inside us, which produces the wins that are ahead of us. And it's been doing that literally since the day you squirmed out of your mother's womb.
I love it, man. I think that we are so often immersed in the little worries of today and are not taking a moment to zoom out and reflect on the journey as a whole. And I like that you could look at it from both perspectives, which is the past of, hey, look what I've done. Like, I feel like I was speaking to somebody yesterday. I was having this conversation with her, and she read an article that recently I was interviewed on, and she said how the most valuable part of it for her was remembering that she had already gone through so much change, and she had been resilient for so much of her life. And she said to me, Jay, I forget that. My mind just, I don't think about it. And when she saw that in that article, when she read that, she said it gave her such a sense of inspiration and drive to be able to keep moving forward, because she was feeling quite stuck with where she was in her career. And I think with Dylan, he's going through this transition right now. He's about to start this new opportunity, and he's fearful of himself falling into that pattern of getting overly stressed, overly anxious about being part of an organization that does have a lot of change and a lot of demand. So I guess, what are some of the things that you recommend for people to be able to work through those kind of environments where it's expected? There's going to be a lot of change. How do you recommend people work through that themselves?
Yeah. So one thing is the temporal distancing thing, like we just talked about. And one of the ways to apply this is to do what I call expect falling apples. Okay. Let me explain what this means. So I said, like, for me, the pandemic was, it was kind of this opportunity to reimagine, or not even reimagine, just see things that were already in front of me that I hadn't noticed before. Okay. And where this idea really struck me is sometime early in the pandemic. Um, I caught wind of this story about Isaac Newton, how during this plague epidemic back in 1665, Newton gets sent home from university because, everybody's quarantining and et cetera. And so they send him home from university, and he's sitting there one day in his childhood backyard, only now he's an adult. And he's like trying to make sense of what's going on around him, like this disruption to his career, this threat to his future, and just the crazy chaos of the world around him, and where it's all going to lead. And it's in the midst of all this pondering and questioning and fear and anxiety when, out of the corner of his eye, he catches an apple fall from a tree, and voila, just like that, the idea that eventually becomes a theory of gravity was born in that moment. Okay. Now, did the apple actually land on his head? That's probably apocryphal. We don't know that, but we do know that he said, "I saw a falling apple," and like that triggered an idea about gravity. Right. So it actually happened. But now here's the interesting thing about it. All right. Newton gets sent home from university, which means he's home, right? He's in the home that he grew up in, where there is an apple orchard in his backyard. This is not the first time Isaac Newton has seen an apple fall from a tree. The guy had seen apples falling from trees his entire life. But it wasn't until this confusing, chaotic, disruptive period in his life when his newly unleashed creative superpowers finally connected the dots between a falling apple and the force of gravity. And we know from neuroscience that that's what change does. It shifts, it makes our brains shift gears, right? Like jump the tracks into this like sense-making mode rather than this kind of default routine mode where it's like we switch our executive functioning off of like, it's just, okay, get through the day, to now it's like, whoa, what's going on? And it's like flipping on the light switch in a room, and all of a sudden everything is the same, but now we see it from a new perspective with new light on, right? And the same thing happens in our brain. Now, what I would say for Dylan and everybody else who's going through this is when you find yourself confronted with a promotion, with a new boss, with a new goal, a new set of metrics, whatever this disruption is, it's kind of making you like, I don't know, expect falling apples. Know that your brain is right now as creative as it will ever be in your lifetime. And you're going to have an insight. I don't know what the insight is. You don't know what the insight is, but it's going to come. So keep your antenna up and look for it.
Yeah. I mean, this is so powerful. This is a story that everyone can relate to, because I know for me, if it weren't for the changes that happened at Tesla many years ago when they brought in a new leader that was not someone I really aligned with towards the very end of my time there at Tesla, I would have never then left to then have the opportunity for apples to fall, meaning for me to be able to recognize that this business was what was next for me, and be able to then chart this course to now be able to be having this conversation with you, because right, none of that would have happened if that change didn't happen. I may still be there, or may still be maybe in a different corporate job, and I wouldn't have had this opportunity to be able to share insights and have wonderful people like yourself be able to add value in people's lives through this podcast. So I think that what you're saying is, when change happens, to see it as an opportunity for growth. That's right.
And it's like we've all kind of heard that, right? I mean, we've heard we've heard the platitudes about, change is optional, or what change is inevitable, growth is optional, and they're all true, right? But it's like to really think about in your own life, how many times has that been true? It's not just true in the abstract for other people,
Right.
But it's been true for you time and time and time again. And I think one of the big shifts in my thinking. So I said there was like a 7-year hiatus between my most recent book and the last one. So the last one was called Ricochet, and the subtitle was "What to Do When Change Happens to You." And I want to. The reason why that matters is because I had been looking at change almost always as like this thing that you have to deal with. Okay, it's coming, it's inevitable. You don't have a choice, so you might as well make the best of it, right? And so it was very much about like resilience, okay, which is great. But what I realized, thanks to Isaac Newton and the pandemic and everything I was seeing, is like, hold on, I've been selling change short. I've been saying it's like this thing that we have to endure. But what if change is not just this thing we have to endure? What if it's is and always has been the springboard to every great thing we've ever accomplished?
Yeah.
Because if you trace the story of your life, if you think right now, Jay, you think about like some achievement that you're proud of. Maybe it was, maybe it was landing a job at Tesla. Maybe it was something you did in high school as an athlete or a musician or, whatever it was. You think of something that really makes you proud. I can almost guarantee that if we were to go back and trace the timeline of that awesome achievement, it almost certainly began with a period of change and disruption that forced you to think about things a little differently, which altered your routine, which led to the growth, which created the big win.
Yeah.
That's how change works.
It's so true. It's so true. This is such a powerful message, Nick. I mean, I think the way we do think about change is, okay, I have to deal with this. This is something I have to get through. And for people who are listening to this, I really hope that they internalize what you're sharing as something that is not just theory. It's not just a nice idea.
Yeah.
It's something to internalize and apply. And if you do,
it's the story of your life.
It's the story of your life because it's already happening.
Yes.
It's already happening.
Yes.
We just perceive it wrong. We perceive it wrong. We're interpreting it incorrectly. Now, the one thing I'm eager to ask you about, because you talk about it a lot, and it's something that comes up in Dylan's story, and it's happening with a lot of people that I speak with, which is they struggle with making decisions. They either fall into being indecisive. They don't know what the right decision is. They stand at that fork in the road and they're like, I don't know which way to go. And I know that this is something you're passionate about. And I know it's related to change, but how do you recommend someone like Dylan to be able to make better decisions and be more decisive?
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic wand quick fix to it. But I do think one is it's hugely about perspective. Okay. And so let me see if all right. So I like to break it down, every decision, into like a kind of a three-part process, right? There's knowing, there's thinking, and there's doing. Okay. And knowing is like knowing what am I trying to accomplish with this decision, with this course of action, which is kind of obvious, but it's often something that we overlook. So like we jump right into the thinking part, into the analysis part of like pros, cons, risks, benefits, etc. But we're jumping the gun. We need to first zoom out and say, but what do I want as a result of this? Like, what am I even trying to get at before it? Because, for example, let's just take a real basic example. So like investment decisions. Okay, you can say, is this a good investment? Is investing in this fund a good investment? Is investing in this stock a good investment? Well, it depends what your investment goals are, right? And so like what may be a great investment for Jay is not a good investment for me because we have different goals, or so it's like, first of all, get clear on what. So in a business perspective, it's like, is your strategy crystal clear? Do you have a strategic imperative that you're aiming for this year? And I don't mean 10, I mean 1. Like when you step back and you say, at the end of this year, if I only accomplish one thing, this is what I want it to be. Okay. or at the end of this month, or whatever your timeline is. So know, what are you trying to accomplish with this decision? Okay, that's first. Secondly, is what most people think about when they think about decision making. It's the analysis piece. It is the pros and the cons, the risk benefits, the assets and the liabilities, and all that other analysis, which is important. It's gathering input. It's doing research. Great. Okay. But then also, a lot of people sort of like stop at that and think that's all there is. But the most important part of making a decision is making a decision. And so it's like, you can't just have great ideas. You can't just do all the homework. You can't just produce a report. You have to make a decision, right?
Go through every if-then scenario,
Yeah.
right? And every plan B that would come after that, but then still stand in that fork of the road and not make a decision, right?
Exactly. And so it's like, at some point, no matter what the decision is, you're going to arrive at that fork. You're going to get 70, 80% of the way there if you're lucky. Lots of times you're going to get 50% of the way there. And there's going to be this huge chasm of unknown and uncertain that not just unknown, unknowable. You cannot know it because the world is going to change the second you make that decision. Okay. So you have to get comfortable with the fact that no matter how much analysis you do, how much research you do, you're going to reach a point where you just have to take a leap of faith. Okay. Now, to help people with this, one thing I heard this CEO a long time ago, one of the things he liked to tell his leaders was, it's the second decision that counts. Okay. It's the second decision that counts. What he means by that is, you're going to have to make decisions every day as a leader. So some studies show that the average leader makes 110 decisions a day. Okay. You're going to make a bunch of decisions. There's going to be lots of unknown variables, lots of unknowns, uncertainties. So you're going to have to make a decision. And I'm not really going to fault you for necessarily making the wrong decision. What I'm going to hold you accountable for is, what did you do after that? Once you made the decision, you got to the top of the hill and you saw the lay of the land. How did you adapt? It's the second decision that counts. The first one just gets the ball rolling, right? And it's like testing your hypothesis. Now that you've tested your hypothesis, what is the conclusion that you're arriving at? That's the one where I'm going to test your logic and your skill at making decisions and, whatever. Like, that's the one I'm going to hold you really accountable for. The first one, you just got to get it started.
You just got to get started, and you have to have the courage to be able to put your flag in the ground and say, this is the direction in which I want to go in. And I always tell people, I say this to my clients all the time, there is no forever decision. There's never a decision that's a life sentence, right? Yeah. Nothing's ever written in stone to that where you couldn't make a change. If you decided to walk down one path in this fork and you realize that this was the wrong direction, you can switch to the other side. You can go back if you have to. Like, no one's going to make you have to keep going that direction other than yourself, right? And it's just, it's something that can hinder us, but it's just our own fears. It's not something that's actually happening that's forcing you to feel like you can't make a second decision. And so, one thing I like to ask,
very few doors are one-way doors. Almost all the decisions we're going to make are two-way doors. If you don't like it, you just take a step back and walk into another door, right?
Right. I love it. I like that. I like that visual. That's so true. And so I want to ask you, Nick, I always like to present our guests with kind of a scenario here, because you've learned about Dylan. We talked about Dylan. Now, let's say Dylan was in the audience at one of your events where you were doing a keynote, and he heard your talk about change, and maybe you touched on decisiveness, and he was inspired by this. And then after, let's say, your keynote, there's a little bit of a break. He comes up to you and he tells you his story and what he's working through, and you have an opportunity there to be able to help him. But what I sense in you is that you probably wouldn't just vomit information. You may start to give him a few questions to consider. What would you ask him? What would be a question that you'd ask Dylan to help him to work through this?
Well, one thing is I'd really like to hear him tell me his story. And the reason I say that is because so on the surface, there's going to be these like behavioral tics and quirks, right, that he's probably going to tell me about. Like, I stay up too late and I really need to get sleep, or I don't eat the way I want, and so I'm sluggish and I don't feel healthy and I don't feel like courageous as a result or whatever. But it's kind of like, in the process of him telling me his story, there's a good chance he'll kind of like tip his hand as to what's the real underlying issue here. Okay. Is it that you're afraid you're going to disappoint somebody? Is it that you're afraid you're an imposter, like you don't really deserve this position? And so I would listen. I'd want to hear him tell me his story and like probe deeper into interesting things I've heard that either sound a lot like somebody else, or like, wow, I've never heard anyone say that before. What makes you say that? Because now we're getting into like a personal issue. Like, I'm not going to get all Freudian on him, but like, now it's like there's something else going on below the surface here that's maybe not common to everybody else. And I want to dig into that.
Yeah. What I'm hearing too is, what is the underlying belief that he's holding on to, right? What's the underlying belief? Because in the end, all that surface stuff, sure, you can give little tips here and there on how to eat healthier, how to sleep better. But if there is a belief that someone's holding on to, they're going to keep falling back into that pattern over and over again. Nick, this was incredible. I took a lot of notes. When I take notes, by the way, that's for me most of the time, like, because I don't want to forget it. Like, you gave a lot of value to me in this conversation, so I deeply appreciate you taking the time. And for anyone who wants to look Nick up, I highly recommend it. So your website, it's Nick Tasler. That's Nick TASLER.com, where they can find you. And there's a lot of info there. I know you're quite active on LinkedIn. Anyone can find you there on LinkedIn. And then your book that came out this year, Your Years of Wonder. Check it out. I have I'll put the link there as well. There's a video of it as well for anyone watching YouTube. We're going to put that into the show notes as well. Nick, I want to just thank you again, my friend, for being a guest and sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Jay. It was a lot of fun. It's great talking with you.
Nick really opened my mind to a new way of thinking in regards to change. He really did. Since I had that conversation, I've thought about change differently, and I think you will as well. And I'm going to do my best to break down our conversation into 3 insights and 3 actionable takeaways. The first insight is the S curve. He also called it loss gain asymmetry. And when you're at the very bottom of that curve and you're going up, change looks like an opportunity. But when you then reach that next level, you're higher up on the S curve, change becomes a threat. And it's 3 times more likely you're going to focus on what could go wrong or what you could lose. And we need to be aware of that, because that could hinder our growth and stop us from leaning into positive change. Second insight, temporal distancing. We are so immersed at times into the current challenges that we're blowing up and making catastrophic. And what we often need to do is just zoom out and look at things from a larger perspective or a wider perspective, and considering our past and our future, which will help us to be able to manage through disruption and change. Third insight, change is not something you have to endure. This was so big for me. It's always like, oh, we have to get through the change. That's how we think about it. But he suggested to see it as an opportunity, that something great is going to come from this. And it always has in your life. You could always trace it back and say how something unexpected, some change actually led to something really good. Here are our actionable takeaways. Number 1, clarify the reality. Be able to discern what's actual reality and what's the reality of what you're telling yourself about your situation. So when you're higher up on that S curve, is it actually a threat, the change, or is that just what you're telling yourself? Second, actionable takeaway, expect falling apples. What a great way to look at the story of Isaac Newton and how change triggers new perspectives. It's only when there was a lot of change that the falling apple woke him up to a different way of thinking. And in the same way, when you have change in your life, something that's unexpected, expect something like that to happen to you. Expect your mind to be open to new ideas and new perspectives. Actionable takeaway number 3, When it comes to decisions, there is knowing, thinking, and doing. So often we jump to thinking, trying to analyze the decision. How do you go about it? Will this one work? Will that one work? But start with knowing. What are your goals? What is it that you're hoping to actually do? What do you want to be experiencing? You have to establish that first before you then determine what the right decision is. Now, the most important part of a decision is making a decision. I like how he said, it's the second decision that counts. The first one just gets the ball rolling, but after that, then you're going to have an opportunity to make another decision, whether you want to make adjustments, refine things, or change course. That's going to be the important decision. But there are very few doors that are one-way doors. If you make a decision, you can always make another decision after that. Join us in our next episode. I'm going to do a deep dive into impermanence. Something that I've learned through studying Eastern philosophy that has really shifted my perspective on how to deal with change, how to deal with uncertainty. And I like how something he said earlier in that there aren't unknowns, that everything is unknowable. And I think that the unknowable is what I want to dive deeper into in that conversation and give you some actionable strategies on how to deal with that which is not known, all the uncertainty, and all the change that could come up in your life and career. So until next time, thank you so much for listening.